No matter how stressful life gets, I can always hop on Minecraft, punch a couple trees, and I'm feeling better. While I'm playing Minecraft today, I'm going to be reading you the scariest stories I could find on Reddit. Let's go ahead and get right into the first one. The first story today is from r/nosleep from user I'm Funerals. I'm a wastewater operator for the county. Something came through our system last week, and I'm never drinking tap water again. I've been a wastewater operator for my county for going on 8 years now. Most people don't want to think about what happens when they flush the toilet, and most of the time, neither do I. I work the overnight shift at the county's water reclamation facility, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. In a facility this size, I'm the only person on site. Because of the risk of hydrogen sulfide gas pockets or falling into an aeration tank, the county required me to wear one of those T-Pass safety pagers. It's a clunky orange motion sensor clipped to my belt. If the internal accelerometer doesn't detect movement for around a minute, it enters a pre-alarm. If I don't tap the reset button, the whole facility's external sirens go off and a GPS emergency ping hits the sheriff's department. H2S builds up in enclosed spaces, sewers, lift stations, and the areas around the open tanks. It smells like rotten eggs at low concentrations, which sounds manageable until you learn that once it hits a higher concentration, it paralyzes your sense of smell. You stop detecting it right around the time it starts killing you. People have died thinking they were fine. People have gone down into a confined space to check on a coworker and died right next to them without understanding what was happening. So, the county gives me a pager. I've never triggered the full alarm in 8 years. Last week, I triggered it at 3:30 in the morning. I've called in sick every day since. I have a case and a half of bottled water on my kitchen counter, and I've not touched my tap since I got home Friday morning. I'm writing this down because my stomach has felt wrong since Saturday, and tonight I walked to my bathroom sink on autopilot and had the tap running and my hand underneath it before I caught myself. The facility runs on routine. That's the whole job, really. 8 years of the same routine executed correctly so that the people of Yoseki turn on their taps in the morning and clean water comes out, and they never think about where it's been or what was done to it, or who spent the night making sure it was safe enough to drink. I don't resent that. I genuinely don't. I knew what the job was when I took it. Thursday night started like every other Thursday night. I arrived at 10:52 p.m. and did my usual handoff with Dale from the evening shift. Dale said nothing out of the ordinary happened. Equipment all nominal, one pump in the secondary clarifier running a little warm, but was within acceptable range. I logged it, told him I'd monitor it, and he left. I heard his truck start in the parking lot, and then it was just me. First thing I always do is walk the facility, because years of overnight shifts teach you that the best diagnostic tool you have is your own body moving. I walked the perimeter of the primary sedimentation tank, the first big settling basin where everything that comes through the county's collection system arrives before treatment begins. Solids sink to the bottom, scum floats to the top, and the middle layer moves forward. It's not a pleasant thing to look at up close, but after a while, it's just data. I walked the secondary clarifiers, checked the aeration basins, and looked at the SCADA readouts on the control room monitors. Flow rates, chemical dosages, turbidity levels, dissolved oxygen, all nominal. I logged everything and settled in. The pager chirped at 11:47 p.m. I hit reset without thinking. I've done it so many times, it's pretty much muscle memory now. The chirp, the reach, the button, the mute, everything was fine. At 12:30 a.m., I collected my routine grab samples. This is exactly what it sounds like. You take a small jar to specific points in the system, collect a sample of whatever is moving through at that moment, and bring it back to the lab for testing. pH, ammonia, turbidity, fecal coliform. The readings tell you how the treatment is progressing and whether anything needs to be adjusted. I've collected thousands of these samples. I can look at a jar and tell you, before I even run the tests, roughly what I'm going to find. I held the jar from the primary sedimentation tank up to the fluorescent light in the lab. I looked at it for a long time, and the color was wrong. Primary tank samples are never pretty. They're gray-brown, opaque, full of suspended solids. That's all normal. That's exactly what you want to see at that stage because it means the system is working. This was darker, something closer to black. A cloudiness that sat differently in the jar, more diffuse, the way dye distributes when you drop it into a glass. The smell was wrong. Under the baseline shit stench, there was something sweet, like clover or honey. I took a second sample, and it was identical. I logged both as anomalous and noted the color deviation and smell irregularity in my shift log. Then I ran them through the treatment protocol. The pager chirped at 1:03 a.m. I hit reset. I waited for the results. I want to explain what the treatment process is supposed to do. Things go in one end of that process looking like what comes out of drains, toilets, and industrial pipes. They come out the other end as water. Clean water. Testable, measurable, and compliant with EPA standards. I've run that process probably 1,000 times, and it's worked every single time because it's designed to. I ran my samples through. I looked at the results. I picked up both jars and held them up to the fluorescent light again. They looked identical to when I had started. The same diffuse cloudiness and the same black tint. I stood in that lab for a long time, just holding those two jars. Then I checked my equipment because obviously something had to be wrong with it. My equipment was fine. I ran the protocol again. Same result. I set the jars down on the bench very carefully. Then I got the microscope. I don't know how long I stood there looking at the slide. Long enough that the pager chirped and I hit reset without looking up from the eyepiece. Under the microscope, the cloudiness resolved into structure. Not the kind of suspended solid I know how to identify and treat. Not anything the process was designed for, because this did not belong in water. It was hair. Tiny orange tufts so small they had passed through the initial screening without catching, distributed so evenly through the sample that they created the diffuse cloudiness I'd seen in the jar. Thousands of them, maybe more. Too small to count and too numerous to try. I know hair under a microscope. Not well, not professionally, but enough. The structure is distinct. The way it catches light is hard to miss. No part of my brain was going to look at that slide and call it anything else. It was hair. I ran the treatment protocol one more time. I looked at the result. I picked up my clipboard and I wrote in my shift log. 237. Noted atypical turbidity reading in primary sedimentation grab sample. Color deviation from baseline. Smell irregularity noted. Second sample collected. Consistent results. Treatment protocol run 3 times. No change in turbidity. Logged for morning review. Because what else do you write? What form exists for this? At 3:12, the SCADA system flagged a flow irregularity in the main intake pipe. I stared at the monitor for a moment before I understood what I was looking at. The inflow rate was fluctuating rhythmically. A pattern, expansion, and contraction at regular intervals that my brain kept trying to map onto something familiar and kept failing. It was the wrong rhythm for water. It was the right rhythm for something breathing. I logged it and called the after hours line. I was told to monitor and document. I said yes, hung up, and stood at the monitor watching the fluctuation move slowly in the direction of the primary sedimentation tank. The pager chirped, I hit reset. Guys, I'm feeling like there's something significant to the pager chirped, I hit reset. I'm not liking it. Also, why's the water breathing? Anyways, let's continue. I went to the tank. The access hatch is a heavy steel panel set into the walkway above the primary basin. There's a specific shit smell that comes up when you crack it, and you learn to turn your face away and let the initial wave pass before you lean over to look. I turned my face away. I let the wave pass, and then I smelled it. That warm clover from the sample jars, rising from the tank in a way that made my stomach turn over. I leaned over and looked down. The beam of my flashlight went further than it should have. Primary tank water is opaque. You can't see more than a few inches into it normally because of the suspended solids. The particulate, everything the county flushes and drains on a given night. I could see the bottom. The water was clear. Whatever was in it had displaced the suspended solids somehow, pushed them aside, and settled them in a ring around the perimeter of the tank so that the center was open and transparent in a way I had never seen. And on the floor of the tank, I could see texture. Just texture pressed against the concrete floor of the basin. Something that covered most of the visible surface. Something that looked like matted wet fur, flattened by the weight of the water above it. Dark with submersion and moving very slightly with a current that shouldn't have been there because the inflow wasn't moving fast enough to create it. Moving the way living things move and dead things don't. I stood there. The facility sounds were gone. I could see the gauges holding steady, the pump still running, but the sound of it had simply stopped reaching me. I stood there anyway. My flashlight beam moved across the floor of the tank slowly, following the texture, and near the far edge of the basin where the shadow was deepest, I saw something that I've been trying to find a different explanation for every night since Thursday. I haven't. A face. Not clearly, it was in the way you sometimes see a face in the grain of wood or the pattern of a ceiling, and your brain assembles it from fragments, and once it's assembled, you can't take it apart again, no matter how hard you try. It was looking up. It had been looking up since before I opened the hatch. The pager blared. The full alarm. The one that means 5 minutes have passed, and I haven't moved, and somewhere in the county a computer's deciding whether to call the sheriff. I ran, hit the reset panel, and logged back into the SCADA. I stood in the control room with my back against the wall and my clipboard against my chest. At 3:47 a.m., my phone rang. The sheriff's department's automated line. The ping had gone out. I told them I was fine and that the equipment malfunctioned on the pager. False alarm. I finished my shift. I don't remember most of it. I know I logged the SCADA readings at the required intervals. I know I filed the anomaly report, and I know I walked out to my truck at 7:03 a.m. and sat in the parking lot for a while to calm my nerves before I could make myself drive. I stopped at the gas station on Route 9 on the way home and bought 2 cases of water. That was 6 days ago. My supervisor called me on Saturday to check in. I told him I had a stomach thing. He said to take the time I need and let him know when I'm ready to come back. I honestly don't know when that's going to be. I've been going through the bottled water fast. I keep forgetting. I'll be making coffee and reach for the tap before I catch myself. I'll be brushing my teeth and realize halfway through that I filled the cup from the sink without thinking. Each time I catch it in time. I think I catch it in time. My stomach has felt wrong since Saturday. Like I've become aware of it in a way I never was before. I need to get a glass of water. I've been writing for hours and I haven't had anything to drink, and I'm thirsty. I have 3 bottles left in the case on the counter. I should get one of those. I will get one of those. I got up to get one. The tap is running. I don't remember turning it on. I'm standing at the sink and the water is running over my hand, and it's been running for a while because my sleeve is wet up to my elbow and I don't... God, the water is very warm. That's not right. I have it on cold. I need to... I'm looking at my hand under the water and there's something... My back molars are starting to ache. Damn, the vibration is so strong I can feel it in my cheekbones. The water is... I can smell the clover through the steam. I should call the sheriff, but I'm going to sit here for a minute instead. I'm just so tired, and it's been a long time since I've felt this safe. I don't know what exactly to make of that story, but I'm not going to drink out of my tap. The next story is by T. Ticeboy 123. I drive the pickup van for a rural funeral home. Every body bag I've ever transported has been silent. Tonight, it wasn't. I'm posting this from a gas station off Route 6. I'm waiting for the sun to come up. I have about 90 minutes. I want to write this down before I drive back, in case I'm wrong about which rule I broke first. My name is Sam. I'm 28. I drive the transport van for a funeral home in a county I'm not going to name. Somewhere between rural and actually rural, the kind of rural where the nearest stoplight is 40 minutes away. I've had this job for 8 months. Before this, I was an EMT. Before being an EMT, I was studying to be a paramedic. I failed out of the paramedic school in my last semester, which is a long story I'm not going to tell here. except to say that I'm good at the field part and bad at the test part, and the system doesn't care which. Nobody else would hire me with a paramedic school washout on my record. Mr. Harmon did. He owns the funeral home. He's 71 and his hands shake a little when he has his coffee with 3 sugars. He hired me because I knew how to handle a body without panicking, and because his last transport driver had quit 2 weeks earlier and he needed somebody fast. The job is exactly what it sounds like. People die at home, somebody calls the funeral home. I drive the van out, I bring a stretcher in, I bring the body out, I drive the body back to the funeral home. That's the entire job. I work nights mostly because that's when most home deaths get reported. On my first day, Mr. Harmon sat me down at the kitchen table in the funeral home's back office. He had a sheet of paper with 8 rules typed on it. He said the rules were old and he didn't know who first wrote them. He said they came with the funeral home when his father bought it in 1971. He said his father followed them and his grandfather hadn't owned the place, but the previous owner had followed them, and the previous owner had told his father that the rules went back further than that. He said I was going to laugh at some of the rules. He said it was fine if I laughed, but I had to follow them anyway. He said the last driver got fired for breaking Rule 6, and the driver before that got fired for breaking Rule 3, and the driver before that just stopped coming to work after a pickup and never came back. And the rules were the only thing that had let Mr. Harmon keep this business running for 40-some years, and his father kept it running before him. I'm going to type out the rules exactly as they were written. I have a copy of the sheet in my glove compartment. I'm looking at it now. Transport rules. Read once, follow always. Always knock 3 times before entering, even if the family is waiting for you and the door is open. Greet the deceased by name when you enter the room, out loud. Do not check the deceased's pulse. You are not there to confirm death. The family already did that. If the deceased is in a bedroom and the bedroom door is closed when you arrive, do not be the one to open it. Ask the family to open it. If anything in the room is making sound, a TV, a radio, a clock, do not turn it off, even if the family asks you to. Once the deceased is on the stretcher, do not leave the room without them. If you have forgotten something in the van, send a family member. When you carry the stretcher out of the room, walk it out feet first. Always say goodbye to the deceased out loud before you close the van doors. Use their name, even if the family is watching, even if you do not believe it. That's it, 8 rules. Mr. Harmon watched me read them, then he asked if I had any questions. I asked him what happens if I break a rule. He said it depended on the rule. He said rules 1 and 2 were the most important, and that breaking either of them was the kind of thing he'd fire me for. He said rule 3 was about respect, and that breaking it wouldn't get me fired, but it would mean I wasn't right for this work. He said rule 4 was the rule the last driver had broken, and that's why he had been fired. He said rule 5 was a rule his father had added in the 80s, and he wasn't sure why his father had added it, but he'd seen things go wrong when other drivers had broken it. He said rule 6 was the one the driver before the last driver had broken, and that one had been bad enough that Mr. Harmon had taken a year off from hiring after it. He said rule 7 was an old funeral home rule from before transports were even a separate job. And rule 8 was the one that mattered most, because it was the only one the deceased could hear. I asked him if he believed all this. He said it didn't matter what he believed. He said his father had followed the rules, and his father was the most rational man he'd ever known. I asked him about the driver who just stopped coming to work. He said he didn't want to talk about that one, that the rules existed because of that one and a few others before her. Then he gave me the keys to the van and a phone number to call when something went wrong on a pickup. He said something always goes wrong eventually. When it does, call the number. Don't try to fix it yourself. I was 27 and I decided I needed the job, and I'd spent 6 years putting needles into people's arms in the back of moving ambulances, so a list of 8 rules from a soft-spoken old man didn't feel like a hard ask. I'm going to tell you about the job because the rules don't make sense without it. Most pickups are quiet. An old person dies in their sleep. The family found them in the morning. They call the doctor confirms by phone or comes out. The doctor signs the paperwork, the family calls us. By the time I get there, the family is in the kitchen drinking coffee, and the deceased is in a bedroom, and somebody walks me back. I do my 8 rules. I bring the body out. The family hugs each other in the driveway. I drive away. The whole thing takes about 40 minutes. I count things. I want to mention that because it'll come up. I count steps from the front door to the body. I count the seconds between when the family leaves the room and when I begin moving. I count the breaths I take while I work. It's something in EMT school that I started as a way to keep myself calm, and it became how I do everything now. My boyfriend says it's the most neurodivergent thing about me, which it might be. He's not wrong about most things. I've done 47 transports in 8 months. The first 46 were ordinary in the sense that nothing about them violated the rules I'd been given. Some of them were sad. Most of them were old people, 2 were younger. A 34-year-old man who died of a heart attack while cooking, and a 12-year-old girl who died of a brain tumor everyone had known was coming. The 12-year-old was the hardest one I'd done before tonight. Her parents had set up a little chair beside her bed, and they took turns sitting in it. When I came in, the mother was sitting there. She didn't get up when I knocked. She nodded at me and said her daughter's name out loud, the same time I did, which was Rule 2, and the only time on any of my pickups that someone has done Rule 2 with me. I'll remember that until I'm dead. I followed every rule on every pickup. I never broke one. I never even came close. The rules became the shape of the job for me. The thing I did to mark my own behavior as professional, the way I used to count breaths in an ambulance. Until tonight. Tonight's pickup came in at 11:14 p.m., and Mr. Harmon called me himself. He said the family had requested an immediate transport and that the location was farther out than usual. He gave me an address that was almost an hour from the funeral home, deep in the part of the county that doesn't have street lights, and where the GPS gives up about 10 minutes before you arrive. He said the deceased was a woman in her 60s named Ruth, and that she died a few hours ago, and that her husband was the one who'd called. The drive out was the longest one I'd done. I counted 23 minutes between the last lit intersection and the turnoff to her road. The road was gravel, and the house was at the end of it. I'm going to describe the house because it matters. It was a small 2-story farmhouse, white with a porch light on. 2 cars in the driveway, one of them being a pickup truck about my van's age. There was a dog tied to a post next to the porch. The dog watched me pull up but didn't bark. There was a single light on in a downstairs window. The rest of the house was dark. I parked. I got out. I went around the back of the van and pulled out my stretcher. I walked up the porch steps. I counted 4 steps. I knocked 3 times on the front door, which is Rule 1. The door opened on the 3rd knock, before the 3rd knock landed even. The man inside opened it as my fist was still moving. He was an older man, mid-60s, in a flannel shirt and jeans. He didn't say anything, he just stepped back to let me in. I want to flag something here that I didn't think about at the time, but I keep thinking about now. He opened the door before I finished knocking. Rule 1 says to knock 3 times before entering. I had knocked twice. He opened the door on the 2nd knock, and I finished the 3rd knock against open air, which technically still counts. I think it still counts. I'm trying to decide. I followed him in. The house smelled like old coffee and something faintly chemical that I associated with the sick room. He led me through a small living room. TV off, a recliner with a folded blanket on it, and down a short hallway. There was a closed door at the end of the hallway. He stopped at it. He said, "She's in there." I said, "I'll need you to open the door for me, sir." That's Rule 4. He looked at me for a long moment, then he opened the door. The bedroom was dim. A single lamp on a nightstand was on, casting yellow light. The bed was against the far wall. There was a woman in the bed, on her back, her arms folded over her chest. Eyes closed, mouth slightly open. Mid-60s, gray hair, a quilt pulled up to just below her shoulders. Ruth. I stepped into the room. I said, "Hello, Ruth," out loud. That's Rule 2. The husband stayed in the doorway. He didn't come into the room with me. That was unusual, but not against the rules. Some family members can't stand to be in the room with the body. I've seen it before. I want to say something about the room. There was a small clock on the nightstand, the old kind with 2 bells on top that an actual hammer hits. It was ticking. The ticking was loud enough to count, which I did because I count things. I counted 12 ticks while I unfolded my stretcher. The ticking was steady. The ticking was the only sound in the room besides my own breathing. I prepared the stretcher. I'm not going to walk you through the procedure of moving a body. It's not the point. I did what I was trained to do. I didn't check her pulse, which is rule 3. I positioned the stretcher next to the bed. I prepared to transfer her. This is when I noticed the second sound. It was very faint, and it was coming from underneath the bed. I want to be specific. It was a sound like breathing. Not Ruth's breathing. Ruth was not breathing. Something else. Something low and slow, with the rhythm of breath, but not the texture of it. No wet sounds, no nasal sounds, just air moving in and out at the pace of a sleeping body. I stopped. I listened. I counted the breaths. I counted 6 breaths in 15 seconds, which is the rate of someone deeply asleep. I looked at Ruth, and her chest was not moving. I looked at the husband, who was still in the doorway watching me. I said, "Sir, is there an animal under the bed?" "No." "Is there anyone else in the house?" "No." I listened again. The breathing was still there, and it had not changed pace. It was still 6 per 15 seconds. It was still coming from directly underneath where Ruth was laying. I'm going to be honest about what I was thinking at this point. I was thinking that there was an animal under the bed and the husband didn't know about it because the dog was outside. I was thinking that I'd reach down and shoo it out and we'd all have a slightly weird story to tell. I was thinking I'd been on this job long enough that nothing genuinely strange was going to happen, and this was probably going to turn out to be a possum or a cat that had snuck in through a window. I looked at the husband, who was very still in the doorway. His hands were at his sides. His face was the kind of polite blank that older men get when they don't know what to do. I asked him to move so I could go to my van and get a flashlight. That would have meant leaving the room without Ruth, which is rule 6. I almost did it. I almost broke rule 6. I had my hand on the bed rail and I was about to stand up and leave. What stopped me was the clock. The clock on the nightstand had stopped ticking. I don't know when. I'd been counting it earlier, but I'd lost count when I started counting the breathing under the bed. I looked at the clock. The second hand was not moving. The minute hand was on the 11 and the hour hand was on the 12. The clock said 5 minutes to midnight, which was about right for the time, but the second hand was frozen. The breathing under the bed was still going. I'm going to walk you through what I did next slowly because I want to be honest about it. I did not leave the room. I remembered rule 6. I looked at the clock again. The clock had stopped, which made me think about rule 5. Rule 5 says do not turn anything in the room off that's making sound. I hadn't turned off the clock. The clock stopped on its own. I don't think that counts as breaking rule 5, but I'm not sure. I knelt down next to the bed. I'm going to describe this carefully. I knelt. I did not put my hand under the bed. I did not look under the bed. I lowered my head slowly to a point about 6 inches above the floor, and I tilted my ear toward the underneath of the bed. The breathing got louder. It got louder in a specific way. It got louder as I got closer, which is what a real sound would do. But it also slowed down. The pace dropped from 6 breaths in 15 seconds to about 4 breaths in 15 seconds. Then 2. By the time my ear was 6 inches off the floor, the breathing was happening at the rate of someone holding their breath between breaths. The kind of long pause you get from someone who's trying not to be heard. I stayed there for a long time. I'm going to estimate I stayed there for 40 seconds. I don't know exactly. I lost track of my counting again. The breathing did not start back up. I sat back on my heels. I looked at the husband. The husband had not moved. He had not said anything since I'd asked him about the animal. His eyes were on me, but they weren't focused on my face. They were focused somewhere just past my shoulder. I looked at Ruth. Ruth was unchanged, eyes closed, mouth slightly open, hands folded. I'm going to tell you what I did, and then I'm going to tell you why. I stood up. I walked to the bedroom door. I asked the husband to step into the hallway. He did. I closed the bedroom door behind me with Ruth still inside it. That broke Rule 6. I walked the husband to the front door. I opened the front door. I asked him to please go sit on the porch and wait there until I called for him. He went. He didn't ask why. He sat on the porch steps next to the dog. The dog still didn't bark. I went back to the bedroom door. I didn't open it. I knocked 3 times. That broke Rule 1 in a different way than Rule 1 usually gets broken. Rule 1 is about entering. I had already entered the room. I had left it. I was about to enter it again. I knocked because the rule felt like it applied even though Ruth couldn't hear it, and even though the room was empty of family. I opened the door. The room was the same. Ruth was the same. The clock was the same. The second hand was still frozen. Little side note, guys. This person, the author, is capturing that this person is neurodivergent very well. Anyways, let's continue. There was no breathing. I want to be clear. I listened for 30 seconds before I moved. I counted the seconds. There was no sound under the bed. Nothing. The room was completely silent except for my own breathing, which I was holding sometimes and not holding sometimes. I kept counting. I went back into the room. I prepared the stretcher again. I transferred Ruth to the stretcher. I did this carefully and respectfully, and exactly the way I was trained. She'd weighed about what I expected her to weigh. She'd been dead for several hours, and her body was at the temperature you'd expect. I rolled the stretcher to the doorway. I walked her out feet first, which is Rule 7. I rolled her down the hallway, through the living room, out the front door, past the husband on the porch steps, who watched me without standing up, down the porch steps, to the back of the van. I loaded her into the van. I closed the back doors. I had broken Rule 6. I had not yet completed Rule 8. I stood at the back of the van with my hand on the door I had just closed. I said, out loud, "Goodbye, Ruth." That's when I heard the breathing again. It was coming from inside the van. I'm at the gas station now. I drove here directly without stopping. The drive took 51 minutes. I counted. I counted 743 breaths during the drive. None of them were mine. I haven't opened the back of the van since I closed it. I called Mr. Harmon. He didn't answer. I left a voicemail. I told him where I was. I told him that something had happened on a pickup and I needed him to call me back as soon as he heard the message. I didn't tell him which rules I'd broken. I'm going to tell him in person. I want to see his face when I do. I keep thinking about the order. I broke Rule 6 when I left the room without Ruth, but I also broke Rule 1 in spirit when her husband opened the door before I'd finished knocking. And I might have broken Rule 5, depending on whether a clock stopping on its own counts as turning it off. I don't know. I don't know which one was the first one I broke or which one was the worst one. I keep thinking about what Mr. Harmon said. He said the rules existed because of the driver who just stopped coming to work. He said he didn't want to talk about her. I kept thinking about the husband. He didn't ask why I was making him wait outside. He didn't ask why I left the room. He didn't ask anything. He just sat on the porch steps next to a dog that didn't bark and watched me drive away. When I pulled out of the driveway, he was still sitting there. I keep thinking about the breathing. Mr. Harmon, if you read this before I get back, please call me. I'm at the Sunoco on Route 6, the one with the broken sign. I'm not going to open the back of the van. I'm going to wait until you tell me what to do. If anyone else is reading this, and you are reading it because something has happened to me and I'm not posting anymore, I want you to know 2 things. The first is that I followed 7 of the 8 rules. I did the best I could. The second is that whatever is in the back of my van, I think it's been breathing the whole time. I think it was breathing under the bed, and now it's breathing in the van, and I think it's been waiting for someone to give it a ride. I said goodbye to Ruth. I said her name out loud. The breathing didn't stop when I said it. I don't know whose name I should be saying. The sun is coming up. I can see the pumps now. There's a man at the pump across from me who's filling up his truck. He waved at me a minute ago, and I waved back. I don't think the man at the pump is real. He hasn't moved since he waved. The pump handle is in his truck, but the numbers on the pump are going up. He's still looking at me. I'm gonna stop typing now and call Mr. Harmon again. I'm going to keep counting. Wow, props to T-Tice-Boy123. That was a really good story. The only thing is, I really want to know why he broke Rule 6. Like, he didn't really give a reason as to why he walked out of the room, but there had to be something. Anyways, let me know what you guys thought about that one. Let's go ahead and get on with the next one. The next one is from Big Analyst 8704. I went to Area 51 to try to expose them. What I found made me question reality. I used to think the world made sense. Not in some deep philosophical way either. I just believed there was always an explanation for things. Governments lied, corporations covered things up, strange things happened sometimes, but underneath all of it, reality itself was still stable, solid, and logical. That belief died in the Nevada desert. For years, I've been obsessed with Area 51. Not the fake internet version full of alien memes and edited UFO videos, but the real place. The lockdown military base no one could fully explain. Every leaked document, every blurry satellite image, every story from former employees only made me more convinced that there was something buried out there that the public was never supposed to see. So I made a plan. I spent months studying maps, patrol schedules, terrain routes, and old online forum posts from people who claimed they'd gotten close before. Most of them sounded insane, but buried inside all the nonsense were patterns, blind spots, weak points, places where security seemed strangely lighter than it should have been. The first fence was almost disappointingly easy. No alarms went off, no floodlights snapped toward me, no helicopters appeared overhead. There were just warning signs half buried in the sand and endless silence stretching across the desert. That silence was the first thing that felt wrong. The desert shouldn't have been that quiet. No insects, no wind against the rocks, nothing. It felt less like a place and more like the world itself had muted everything around me. I kept moving anyway. About an hour after crossing into restricted territory, I noticed lights beneath the ground. Thin white streaks glowing under the desert surface like veins under skin. At first, I thought it was some kind of buried electrical system. Then the lights started moving. Something was traveling beneath me. I froze there in the dark, staring down at the glowing trails as they shifted underneath the sand in massive patterns that stretched farther than I could see. It looked less like machinery and more like something alive moving underground. I should have turned around. Instead, I followed them. Eventually, they led me to a circular metal hatch partially buried beneath layers of sand and rock. There were no warning labels, no military markings, nothing except a strange symbol carved into the surface. The second I looked directly at it, my head started pounding. It's hard to explain. The symbol didn't look unnatural at first glance, but the longer I stared at it, the more impossible it became. My eyes couldn't seem to focus on it properly. It felt like my brain was rejecting the shape itself. I pulled out my camera to record it. The screen immediately glitched. Static flooded across the display for a few seconds before an image appeared. At first, I thought it was live footage. Then, I realized what I was looking at hadn't happened yet. It was me, standing in a hallway somewhere underground. Blood covered the side of my face. I was shaking, crying, staring directly into the camera. Then, the footage cut out. I remember whispering, "What the hell?" The hatch wasn't locked. That terrified me more than anything else could have. I climbed down into the shaft beneath it, using a rusted ladder that seemed to descend forever. The deeper I went, the warmer the air became until it felt thick and wet in my lungs. By the time I reached the bottom, sweat was dripping down my neck, even though the underground corridor was dimly lit by cold red emergency lights. The hallway felt wrong immediately. The walls looked like concrete, but the angles subtly shifted whenever I stopped looking directly at them. Distances stretched and shrank. The corridor seemed longer in front of me and shorter behind me at the same time. and somewhere deep inside the facility, I could hear sounds echoing through the halls. Metal scraping, people crying, and distant applause. I found the first room by accident. It looked like some kind of medical ward. Metal beds lined the walls with restraints attached to them. Small restraints. Child-sized restraints. Most of the beds were empty except for one near the back corner, hidden underneath a sheet. As I stepped closer, the shape underneath moved. I stopped breathing. The thing beneath the sheet looked too long to be human. Its proportions stretched unnaturally beneath the fabric as it slowly shifted against the mattress. Then it spoke. My face hurts. It sounded exactly like my younger sister. My sister died in 2011. I ran instantly, and I didn't look back. I just sprinted down the hallway while my heartbeat pounded so hard it made my vision blur. But after a few seconds, I realized something horrifying. There were footsteps behind me. Not chasing me, matching me, perfectly synchronized with my own. Every time my foot hit the floor, another step landed directly behind it. I finally stopped and spun around. The hallway was empty, but the footsteps stopped at the exact same moment mine did. The deeper levels were worse, far worse. I found rooms that made absolutely no sense. One chamber contained hundreds of televisions showing random people sleeping inside their homes. Another room somehow had almost no gravity at all. Papers and tools drifted through the air like they were underwater. Then there was the corridor where every single door led back into the same hallway, no matter which direction I turned. I spent nearly 20 minutes trapped there before one of the doors finally opened somewhere different. That's when I found the observation chamber. A giant glass wall overlooked what looked like an entire city, except it wasn't Earth. I know how insane that sounds, but there's no other way to describe it. The sky outside the glass was dark purple, filled with gigantic geometric shapes hanging motionless above the horizon. The buildings twisted upward at impossible angles, and thousands of tiny figures moved silently through the streets below. A voice suddenly spoke beside me. "You are not supposed to be down here." I nearly screamed. There was a man standing next to me wearing a dirty lab coat. I hadn't heard him enter. His face looked exhausted, hollow, like someone who hadn't slept properly in years. I asked him what the place was. For a long time, he just stared through the glass. Finally, he whispered, "This is where they came from." I asked him who they were. That's when he looked at me, and I realized his eyes weren't human. There were too many pupils, tiny black circles shifting inside each iris like insects moving beneath water. "They aren't aliens," he said quietly. That was the cover story. Then he smiled weakly. "They're us." I thought he was insane until he activated the monitors behind the chamber. Historical footage appeared across dozens of screens. Wars, riots, assassinations, disasters, but hidden in every video was the same tall, blurred figure somewhere in the background, silently watching events unfold. Then one video froze on screen. A birthday party from 1998. My birthday party. I felt my entire body go cold. There was a tall figure standing behind the fence in my childhood backyard, staring directly at me. I asked the scientist how that was possible. His expression changed into something close to pity. "They've been observing humanity for a very long time," he said. "What are they?" I asked. And then he said the sentence that destroyed me completely. "They're what humanity becomes later." At that exact moment, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the chamber. Then the screaming started. Not real screaming somewhere in the facility. It blasted through hidden speakers all around us. Thousands of voices crying out in agony at once. Something moved behind the glass. A shape taller than any human figure slowly unfolding itself inside the darkness beyond the chamber. Its outline flickered strangely, like corrupted video footage. Then every monitor turned back on at the same time. Every screen showed me. Different versions of me. Older, dead versions. versions missing eyes or limbs. One version sat silently in my apartment, staring directly into the camera. All of them spoke together. You were never supposed to remember. The glass exploded inward. After that, my memory breaks apart. I don't remember escaping. I don't remember getting back to my truck. The next clear memory I have is driving through the desert at sunrise with blood all over my clothes and dirt packed beneath my fingernails. At first, I convinced myself none of it had been real. Maybe some kind of psychological experiment, hallucinations, military gas exposure, anything logical, anything explainable. Then I got home, and things started changing. Pictures in my apartment weren't the same anymore. Objects moved overnight. Sometimes I'd wake up with cuts on my arms I couldn't explain. Then I started noticing people staring at me in public. Not normal staring, recognition, like they knew me. Last week, I finally checked the damaged SD card still hidden in my pocket from that night. Most of the footage was corrupted beyond recovery, except for the final clip. It showed me standing in a dark underground hallway, bleeding heavily from the face, exactly like the vision I'd seen earlier on my camera screen. I was crying while speaking directly to whoever held the camera. "If you're watching this," I whispered, "don't let them convince you the sky is real." Then something unfolded behind me from the darkness. Tall, thin, and wrong. And before the footage ended, I looked directly into the camera one last time and whispered, "They're waiting for us to notice them." Ever since watching that recording, I've started seeing figures standing outside my house at night, across the street, at the ends of hallways, sometimes reflected in mirrors behind me. Last night, I finally saw one clearly. It looked exactly like me, just older. Its mouth stretched into a smile far too wide for a human face. Alright, yeah, I can confidently say that one messed me up a bit. How much do we truly know about our perception of reality? All we know is what our governments allow us to know. Anyways, not trying to give you guys nightmares. But definitely go check that one out on Reddit. Give it some more upvotes because it literally only has like 120 or something like that. Huge shout out to Big Analyst 8704. Great story. Anyways, that's all the scary Reddit stories in Minecraft I have for you today. If you liked today's video, don't forget to drop a like and subscribe. If you didn't like today's video, you might like tomorrow's or yesterday's because I upload every day. Huge shout out to my channel members. If you guys do want to further support the channel, that link's going to be down in the description. However, it is never required, always an option. Also been forgetting to mention, I am on Spotify and Apple Music now. I'll put both of those links in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow.